Hey everyone, Zach from thebarbellphysio.com, and today we're going to review Rep Fitness's PR5000 squat rack, which has been the squat rack I've been using for the last several months. Absolutely love it, but I want to take you through the pros and cons and why I made certain decisions on the exact specifications and attachments that I went with. So first for me, one of the biggest considerations as somebody working out in a home gym and creating a lot of content is I need room to move for different exercises when I'm filming. So I didn't want to go with a super large power rack that ate up all of my floor space, but simultaneously I didn't want to be in such a narrow rack that I couldn't be inside of it doing certain movements. So the PR5000 comes in 3 different depths: 16 inches, 30 inches, and 41 inches, and I went 30 inches. At my physical therapy clinic, I have a 16-inch power rack from another company, and it just feels way too narrow to actually squat or do any variations inside of the rack where you're gonna have your pin and pipe or your flip down safeties. So I didn't want to go with that narrow. I also didn't want to go 41 inches wide, so I went 30, and I've been incredibly pleased with the depth of this rack. The other consideration you have with the PR5000 is you can get another cross member in uprights to then have a weight storage option, but for the same reason of wanting to reduce my floor space, I didn't go with that, and instead I just stayed using my standard weight tree on wheels that I can move around to wherever I want, and I also have a 5-post barbell holder in another area. So I went with minimizing my storage on this rack to minimize my footprint. The next thing to consider with this rack is going to be the height. So it's going to come in 2 different height options: 80 inches tall and 93 inches tall. I'm 6'2" with really long arms, so I went 93 inches tall. Other companies such as Rogue Fitness, they offer a similar size frame that go up to 100 inches, which might be a consideration you need to make if you are also really tall. I originally went with a 1.25 inch standard pull-up bar, and what that would result in is when I was standing flat-footed on the ground, I'd be holding the pull-up. So I couldn't actually lower all the way down to the ground without my feet hitting the ground. That kept me from doing different CrossFit movements like kipping pull-ups and toast bars because I couldn't actually open my legs up without my feet making contact. So I actually went back a couple weeks after I purchased this and instead got this multi-grip bar that goes up at an angle. It still offers a wide enough frame for me to do kipping movements without my feet touching the ground. But if you are over 6 foot tall, you really need to consider the height of this rack compared to others, or what pull-up you do if you're somebody that's going to be doing like kipping type variations. If you're doing strict pull-ups and you're bending your knees or just weighted pull-ups, then a straight bar, even if you're tall, is probably not going to be an issue with this rack. The next decision I had to make was on the color. And with these dark walls that I have in here, I wanted something that provided a little contrast and stood out. So I previously had a black squat rack that I felt like just really blended into the wall. I really care about the aesthetics maybe a little bit more than most people do. So I went white. I love the look of the white. But I will say, like, a negative to this is that I've not had this rack for a really long time, and I already have a number of different scuff marks on the white that I feel like over time that's gonna get a lot worse. But in 6 months of having this, it's not bad. It's not something you certainly notice on camera unless I really zoom in, but it's one of those little details that bothers me just a little bit, but it's still worth it for me to have the white and that contrast against my dark walls. Up next, if we look at the cross members, so I went with this matte black cross members just because so many of the attachments like the dip bar, I kind of wanted those colors to match up a little bit, but I love how these are set off the ground a little bit versus some power racks where you're not gonna have that or it's gonna be flatter to the ground, because that then gives me another attachment point for not just my band pegs, but also to attach bands to that and do exercises such as the back attack that I'm showing here. It's just a great little piece. It's low enough to the ground though that when you're doing deadlifts inside the rack, that you're not going to run into that. The sturdiness of this rack is insane. So previously working out on more of like a squat stand, I would lose a lot of stability. I'd feel that thing moving around quite a bit, but I can do a lot of different both gymnastics movements and heavyweight movements here. And the sturdiness is not a factor when these things are bolted down into the concrete. So I can do toes bars, I can do kipping pull-ups. I've done rack pulls with over 600 pounds off of my pin and pipes. Sturdiness has not been an issue at all with this squat rack over the last several months. Now, speaking of doing those rack pulls, I will say one thing that I would have done different is I went with these pin and pipe safety bars. And I wish instead that I'd gone with the flip down safeties. There's a pretty high likelihood that I'm gonna swap those out here soon. The pin and pipes are just kind of a pain in the butt because you have to, when you want to move it, hold the pipe, slide that pin all the way out, go to the next level, line them up and push them in. And I just think it takes a little bit more time than I'd want it to, versus if I had those flip downs, all I would have to do would be pull the pin out, twist that up, pull it out just like it's a J-cup, and move that back into place. The flip down safety is also flatter with that little plastic coating on top, would probably be a little bit more forgiving on my barbells when I'm doing things such as rack pulls. So for sure consider that, and I would really push you towards the flip down safeties instead of the pin and pipe. I'm also just not a big fan of the straps in terms of the safety, just because I want a firmer surface when I'm doing rack pulls and such exercises over just straps. All right, let's talk about the hole spacing here. So they've got 1-inch holes on the PR5000 versus the PR4000 has 5/8 of an inch holes. And that's just something to consider if you're already coming into looking for a power rack with a lot of attachments. You might want to consider that so that you don't have to spend a lot of money on attachments if you have different holes. These hole spacings are every 2 inches, which is a little wider than the PR4000 is. Not a big deal for me and how I train, but the big thing that I love of this over the PR4000 or other squat racks that I've been on are the laser cut numbers going all the way up, where they're hitting each hole, versus a lot of racks either don't have those at all or maybe have them every 5. And there's nothing I hate more than having to move around and count up holes on the rack to know where to put my J-cups or my pin and pipe safety kit. I just want to be able to look quickly, find the number, put it into place, and not mess around and count, or have the awkwardness of having that uneven when you set it on the wrong hole number. So I love the laser cut numbers going up each rack. All right, next let's talk about attachments. One thing that I'm gonna add to this is that I'm gonna get a second set of J-cups. So I get really annoyed. I do so many exercises where I'm inside the rack, and then the next thing I'm doing, I'm gonna be outside the rack. So take a workout where maybe I'm doing some heavy squats and I wanna have the pin and pipe safety set as a safety mechanism, but my next exercise is something like a walking lunge or a reverse lunge where I need to be outside of the rack. I hate constantly having to move my J-cups, so one thing I'm gonna do is buy a second set of J-cups just so I can keep one in the inside, one in the outside, and make those transitions a little bit smoother. And then I can also just leave one of my barbells always on the inside of the rack and not have to do the weirdness of getting that bar into the rack, which is just kind of a little bit of a pain to do. So get a second set of J-cups if you're somebody that also trains very similarly there. I love their dip attachment here, super stable. You know, sometimes I get on dip attachments and you can actually feel that thing wiggle, but they actually got a nice pin in here that keeps this thing pretty locked down and stable. So really like their PR5000 dip station. I already talked about the band pegs here. Love those. I also really love these leg rollers. So if you've not used leg rollers before, they're super nice. I think the awkwardness of getting in the right position for something like a rear foot elevated split squat, when athletes are of so many different heights, it's nice to have something like this that you can just put in at different levels. Those are kind of expensive for what they are, because you could also very simply just take a barbell, if you have 2 barbells, and put a second barbell across J-cups out here, and then put your foot on the bar if you don't want to spend the money on buying these double leg rollers, but they're a nice piece to have. There are a few pieces that I didn't go with. I didn't add the lat pull down, because if I added the lat pull down attachment on the back, that would have taken up a lot more floor footprint. I also don't use a lat pull down very often. I don't use jammer arms or ISO arms very often, though those are a cool option with this rack. Training in more of a CrossFit style training, that's not something that I would ever show up in my workout, so it wasn't something that I looked at purchasing. Then they also have a cool belt squat attachment, but I have a Squat Max MD, which is like top of the line belt squat, so I didn't go with that, and I have no experience with their belt squat attachment, but it might be one thing worth considering for you in your training. All right, so there you have it, the PR5000, a fantastic squat rack. I've not regretted buying it at all. There were some small changes that I would have made, such as the coloring, but overall a great squat rack, and I'm very, very happy with it. If you're looking at this rack, please click the link in the bio or below this video. That's my affiliate link for Rep Fitness. It helps support different videos like this that I put out for you. Hope you got a lot of information out of this. If you have any questions, feel free to drop it in the comments below as well.